After just 1 year of hopeful budget news driven by the power of the legislature to give Milwaukee and Milwaukee County the ability to raise taxes, budget problems are once again looming for both municipalities. For the first time in decades, 2024 marked a year without budget cuts. Milwaukee County was able to have a surplus, cut property taxes, and make investments in parks, housing, and transportation. Now, leaders are warning of difficult decisions and the return of service cuts to the 2025 budgets and future budgets as well. What happened, and how can the city and county move forward without significant cuts to services? Helping us understand the complexities of government budgets and to give us some perspective is Rob Henken, the immediate past president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. He has reviewed and analyzed municipal budgets for nearly 2 decades. Rob, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Denise.
How did we get here? When the legislature gave the city and county the ability to raise taxes and revenue, at least people thought that Act 12 was going to bring municipalities closer to fiscal stability. What went wrong?
Well, so first of all, this is not entirely unsurprising, number one. Number two, while unquestionably both the city and the county face significant financial challenges, and particularly in the case of Milwaukee County, sooner than we at the Wisconsin Policy Forum had expected, the magnitude of the challenges are not nearly what they were prior to the passage of Wisconsin Act 12. But essentially what has happened, Denise, for both governments is a combination of the fact that certain revenue streams, including in the county's case, the additional sales tax that it was able to levy, the proceeds from that have not met budgetary expectations. With regard to the city always expected a big problem for 2025, given that it had used its federal pandemic relief aid in many respects to continue to prop up city services and avoid service cuts. So I think the fact that the city was going to experience a big challenge as soon as 2025 was not entirely unexpected, though even in their case, the challenge may be a little bit bigger than expected just because certain expectations just have not panned out.
Let's talk about each of them separately. As you said, the city was using some additional revenue streams that it had. What does the future hold for the city of Milwaukee? Because those revenue streams were short-term, they are gone. These issues that the city is facing with its budget are not going to get any better.
No, and I also don't think there's any question that we've seen a reversal over the past decade. It used to be Milwaukee County that was facing close to an existential crisis in terms of its financial situation. The county has spent many, many years trying to address some of the fundamental problems and has had some success. City government, the problem was not as acute until very recently when an unexpected huge surge in the required taxpayer contribution to the city's pension fund really moved the city into a crisis state. So the extra revenue afforded by this historic legislation in the summer of 2023 is pumping more than $200 million of additional resources into the city budget. So you would look at that on its face and assume, well, boy, that must pretty much take care of the problem. But the larger problem is, number one, that same legislation also actually increased the size of the taxpayer obligation to the pension fund by about $50 million. And as I mentioned previously, the city has about $110 million hole because it had been using this one-time federal pandemic relief aid to avert big service cuts in the previous 2 or 3 budgets. So now that those dollars have gone away, the city would really need to see very healthy increases in its newfound revenue streams, both its increased shared revenue from the state and its new 2% city sales tax. And it's just looking based on sales tax collections thus far in 2024, both statewide and locally, that while it hopefully will not see deficits in the case of its 2% sales tax, it's not going to enjoy the type of growth, at least in 2025, that it had originally anticipated.
So where does the city go? How does the city make up the difference in what it needs to be able to continue services and what it's actually going to have available? Are service cuts just inevitable?
Service cuts are pretty much inevitable, and that is really compounded by the fact that, again, we keep on talking about this historic Wisconsin Act 12, which unquestionably saved the day for the city. But at the same time, not only did it add some pension costs, it put in place a requirement that essentially cuts to public safety are off the table. By far, the two biggest departments in city government are the Milwaukee Police Department and the Milwaukee Fire Department. And so with those two departments off the table in terms of the need for deficit reduction, it puts that much more pressure on areas of the budget like the libraries, public health, Department of City Development, Department of Neighborhood Services, to a lesser extent because they're reliant on fees, but still to some extent the Department of Public Works. So I think the city has some advantages that it did not have prior to Act 12. It looks like its reserves are growing again, and so it may be able to take some reserve balances, and that could help ease the strain of cuts at least for a year or two. Again, there's a better prospect of revenue growth than the city has had in the past because its revenue streams are diversified, but I think some expenditure cuts are certainly going to have to be on the table.
Let's talk about Milwaukee County. It is in a bit of a different situation than the city of Milwaukee is.
It is. And again, as one who, as you said at the outset, has analyzed these budgets for 2 decades, it's somewhat surprising to see that the county is in better condition. So first of all, Milwaukee County, due to a variety of both good fortune and also shrewd management, did not have to use these one-time federal pandemic relief dollars for the most part to sustain operations over the past 3 or 4 years. The one exception is for its transit system. So the county doesn't have that same pull now that those dollars have expired for the most part. Again, it does have a hole in transit. Furthermore, the county has really substantially been able to build up its reserves. It has a debt service reserve that now has more than $100 million. And nobody wants to diminish or deplete reserves. But at the same time, most would agree that that's a healthier level than perhaps the county needs. So that could be a source of some relief in future budgets. So the size of the gap for the county is not as large as the cities. The budget director has estimated as big as an $87 million gap. I've not seen a projection for 2025 for the county. My sense is it's closer to $20 to $30 million. That is still a lot of money. That is still a serious problem. But there are some other tools in the toolbox for the county that should ensure that while this will be a tough county budget in 2025, and certainly tougher than we anticipated when we reviewed the last budget almost a year ago, the extent of the service cuts for the county should not be as severe as for the city.
One thing that particularly city leaders have suggested is that maybe the municipalities, Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee, need to go back to the state and ask the state for help. If they do that, how likely is it that they're going to get help again? And what could that help even look like?
Yeah. So I would agree with your assessment. And again, we typically don't get into the politics, but by golly, this was monumental what the city and county were able to accomplish in Madison just one summer ago. And so the prospect of further help on the revenue side from the state looks to be pretty dim for the foreseeable future. Now, might there be some specialized assistance that the state might be able to offer? In the county's case, there's a dire need for a new public safety building. And that public safety building houses state employees who work for the district attorney's office and for the courts. So might there be some help there? Might there be some other specialized assistance for law enforcement, for example, that state leaders might consider, given that there has been certainly sympathy in the past from the Republican side of the aisle for boosting public safety budgets in the city of Milwaukee. But in terms of widespread assistance, that's not looking likely. And one of the points that the Wisconsin Policy Forum has continually made is that one of the things that really is going to have to get a closer look is the possibility of sharing and consolidation of services between these two large governments, and perhaps between the county and the city and other municipal governments in Milwaukee County, several of which are experiencing financial challenges of their own.
Right. This is not, well, the problems may be more acute or seem to be more acute, and the numbers are obviously larger in the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. Other municipalities are not immune from some of these very same challenges impacted by shared revenue, which is up, but not as much as municipalities would like, and everybody's been hit by issues around inflation.
Yes, so that's just the point that I was going to make. I mean, inflation, and while it has eased nationally, by virtue of the fact that cost of living adjustments for salaries, which are a must in this historically tight labor market if governments want to retain and recruit staff, just giving 3% pay increases in these major cost centers, that's going to eclipse for many governments the revenue growth they can get year to year from their property tax levy because of state limits. So yes, Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee, those governments are not alone. And in fact, Wauwatosa has already been speaking publicly about some of the severe challenges that they are facing on the horizon. Lots of local governments now throughout the state of Wisconsin are turning to referendum to exceed property tax levy limits, as many of our school districts now are, because they just cannot keep up with these inflationary costs due to the limitations that they have on their revenue streams.
Rob, thanks so much for helping us understand what's happening. It's important that we just not look at the fact that, there could be holes in the budget and services could be cut, but we really understand what's happening. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
The Wisconsin Policy Forum will issue its budget briefs on the proposed budgets for Milwaukee and Milwaukee County in the coming weeks. Check the website, wispolicyforum.org, for details. We'll be right back.